Hello there. According to the latest data from Eurostat, the Eurozone and the wider EU economy are shrinking at a record rate. Firstly, please subscribe and like this video to give my channel a boost. And I'm always uploading new content, so please do check back daily. The latest Eurostat numbers show that during the second quarter of 2020, that's over April, May and June, Eurozone Gross Domestic Product fell by 12.1% and the wider EU economy shrank by 11.9%. And when you compare that to the same period a year ago, Eurostat says, seasonally adjusted GDP decreased by 15% in the euro area and by 14.4% in the EU in the second quarter of 2020, after minus 3.1% and minus 2.5% respectively in the previous quarter. These were also by far the sharpest declines since time series started in 1995. But please bear in mind that these are only preliminary flash estimates, so they may be amended later on. Now here are how some of the 10 EU member states fared on an individual basis that we know about. Belgium, down 12.2% on the quarter and 14.5% on the year. Germany, down 10.1% on the quarter and 11.7% on the year. Spain, down 18.5% on the quarter and 22.1% on the year. France, down 13.8% on the quarter and 19% on the year. Italy, down 12.4% on the quarter and 17.3% on the year. Austria, down 10.7% on the quarter and 13.3% on the year. And Portugal down 14.1% on the quarter and 16.5% on the year. These are the only figures available for individual countries, and I suspect many people would have been very interested in how countries like Sweden are doing. But these numbers do show how unevenly individual countries are being hit across the whole EU. And although many are stuck within the same currency and all within the same legal straitjacket, they do not have a single central treasury or a single central bank with the authority to coordinate a proper pandemic response. So it will be messy in the EU as member states try to pull in different directions to meet the obligations to their own domestic voters. The fallout from the continued lockdowns by EU member states will, in terms of internal diplomacy, be akin to a pack of hungry werewolves locked in a cell together at full moon. While some would argue that in the UK, every local lockdown will bring a cry of, "'Tis only a flesh wound," reminiscent of the Monty Python Black Knight, where in the end only the body of the City of London is left to prop up the whole economy. Now, just recently, the US published its own GDP figures, and it was fanfared across the world that US GDP had crashed by an almighty 32.9%. So anyone comparing that to the newly released EU figures would wipe their brows and say to themselves that they're glad they don't live in the US, and then blame Donald Trump. Especially our rather anti-Trump press, wouldn't they? And our pro-EU campaigners here in the UK are probably circulating these numbers right now to try and big the EU up and say that the UK should avoid the US as it's doing so badly. But, and boy is this one humongously large but, stop tittering out there, and no comparisons with the rear ends of some well-known politicians. So what is this big however? Well, it comes down to how those two figures are calculated and what they actually represent. And the UK press will not point this out to you, despite it being a very simple concept. Let's take the Eurozone Q2 drop in GDP of 12.1% first. That shows that between April and June, GDP fell by 12.1%. Now for the US figure of 32.9%. That is an estimate of how much US GDP would drop by the end of a full year if the drop seen in Q2 2020 were to continue unchanged. In fact, on a quarterly basis in Q2, the US economy lost about 10% of GDP, I think. Now, Eurostat actually produces that annualised number for EU data for us, if you know where to look. It's called the Chain-Linked Volumes Annualised Percentage Change on the Previous Period. And let's take a look at those, shall we? As already discussed, the US is at minus 32.9%. But the EU as a whole would see a loss of minus 39.8% of GDP. And the Eurozone loss would be minus 40.3%. Don't believe me? Well, here's what the Wall Street Journal report says. The Eurozone Gross Domestic Product fell 40.3% annually in the 3 months through June, exceeding the US economy's 32.9% contraction, according to data published Friday. And the New York Times explains this quite neatly by saying, "The United States has traditionally reported GDP and some other economic statistics as annual rates. Rather than simply giving the percentage change from one quarter to the next, the government reports how much GDP would grow or shrink if that rate of change were sustained for a full year." What's that noise? Ah yes, the sound of Ramonas slapping their hands over their ears, slamming their eyes shut and shouting blah blah blah. So on a GDP level playing field, you can suddenly see that the US economy isn't doing all that badly, is it? In fact, it's Brussels, not Washington, that should be answering the hard questions on this. And I'm not sorry to have burst any Remainer or Rejoiner bubbles that might be floating about out there. And it's not what the pro-EU, anti-Trump brigade want to hear about, is it? And that's why you won't hear about this from the mainstream press. For example, the BBC reported that the US economy shrank at a 32.9% annual rate between April and June as the country grappled with lockdowns and spending cutbacks during the pandemic. Without making it clear what annual rate means, and without, as far as I can see, telling us what the actual Q2 drop was, before then launching into a real doom and gloom anecdotal article on the US economy. Whereas they reported today that the Eurozone saw its overall GDP decline by a record 12.1%. Why not use, or at least mention, the annualised figure for the Eurozone of minus 40.3% as well, and then compare that to the US minus 32.9%, that they previously reported themselves? Well, we can all guess the answer to that, can't we? Now, when you look at the recent figures out from the Office for National Statistics for UK GDP, you will see that it plummeted between March and May by 19.1%, which on the face of it looks far worse than all the US, EU and Eurozone falls when using the same measure. Just goes to show you how expert the UK citizenry is at following orders to lock down and trash their own economy, I hear you say. And once again, the pro-EU lobby will be shaking their heads and saying, "I told you so," etc. But the ONS figures are lagging the others by a month, so we don't know the actual full Q2 data until the ONS publishes them on the 12th of August. So we in the UK still have to factor in June's GDP figures that we don't yet know and remove February's pre-COVID figure for the numbers to be more comparable with US, EU and Eurozone figures. And if July follows June's slight increase in UK GDP, then the full numbers for Q2 may not look as bad at all. So as you can see, the EU is arguably faring a lot worse than the US, and has still not even started on its internal political squabbles yet. And with growing disquiet in Italy and Ireland, which is steadily spreading, it might well end up lagging the US and Brexit UK as we exit the post-pandemic starting gate. Anyway, if you want to hear more from me, please don't forget to subscribe and also press that little bell, or you won't get any notifications. And if you want to see more of me, buy a mug with my mug on it. So what do you think about all of this? Please share and comment, and thank you for watching.